Hi everybody, thank you for joining me. So I finished episode 3 of The Beatles Get Back by Peter Jackson. What a trip it's been over the last few days. Thank you very much for everybody who's been sending me comments on my reviews of episode 1 and 2 with your thoughts about what you've been watching. It's clear that generally you've been absolutely loving this, and this is definitely the biggest thing that's happened in the Beatles world since the anthology came out 26 years ago. It's been incredible, really. I'm going to be talking here about episode 3, which, as I say, I've just finished watching. I'm going to go over like the key points, the main things that happened, what I thought about them, what I think was maybe going on sort of, behind the eyes, if you like. And please let me know in the comments what you think about this episode 3 as well. So, episode 3, I've got my notes as well, as usual, because there's just so much to take in here. Episode 3, 138 minutes. 2 hours, 18 minutes. It's been, what a ride it's been. But it starts off on the 26th of January. They're really in that run-up now to getting ready for the rooftop concert. It starts off with Ringo showing George Octopus's Garden on piano. And George clearly wants to help. It's something that we saw a lot over the next few years once the Beatles had split up. You know, they all helped Ringo out. They all worked with him. They all wrote songs for him. And you see George trying to find the chord. You know that chord change in Octopus's Garden where it shifts to I'd ask my friends. And you see George really trying to find that chord. You know it needs to shift, but he doesn't quite get there yet. They're working on Let It Be. Now, Linda's daughter Heather, who would of course become Paul's daughter as well when he adopted her. She's very, very present on screen for a few minutes here. Now I can imagine that was probably quite off-putting in the studio. There is a funny moment though when Yoko is singing for a little while. You hear Yoko singing and then it cuts to Heather and Heather just goes like that. I thought that was quite funny. I don't know whether that was some cheeky editing or whether it really happened like that, but then we see Heather at the mic singing in a Yoko style, so that was quite a funny moment. It's all well and nice, but I'm kind of hoping that Heather isn't going to be on screen much longer at this point. They're having fun again, they're jamming on oldies. It doesn't feel productive though, again to me, with 3 days to go until they're going to do the rooftop concert. Is this the most productive use of the time? Presumably they're not considering these for the live show, and also Paul's on piano. They've already said having a big piano up on that roof is not an option because of the weight and the size of it, so I'm not quite sure why they're doing that at this point. We've then got some serious attempts to get the Long and Winding Road ready. Now, with everybody knowing their parts, Ringo looks absolutely bored stiff. It reminded me of Ringo's quote about Sgt. Pepper, where he said the main thing he remembers about the Sgt. Pepper sessions is that he learned how to play chess during them, and he just looks bored stiff here. Paul's directing everybody. I've seen a lot of comments over the last couple of days about sort of Paul's role within the Beatles at this point, and a lot of people saying, you know, Paul just clearly looks like he's taking over too much, he's directing, he's being bossy, and I understand that, but I also think that if Paul McCartney hadn't have taken on that role, none of the others were going to do, and if he hadn't done, then I think there's a good chance that we would have got nothing from the Beatles after Sgt. Pepper. Once Brian Epstein died, I think, as annoying as some people might find Paul's approach, without it, I don't think there was any Beatles for those last couple of years. So they seem like they're not really ready yet with the Long and Winding Road, but they're not far off. But Glyn Johns says, should we do a take? Should we try it? And then bam, it's straight into the version that we get on the album. It's done, it's recorded. Albeit, of course, that Phil Spector would come along a year later and add all sorts of things to this particular take, much to Paul McCartney's disgust. There's an interesting conversation here where they're talking about, are you going to add strings to it? Are you going to add brass to it? And Paul's sort of thinking about it. A year later, there's a famous letter that Paul McCartney sent. He sent it to Alan Klein, but it was really sort of based on what Phil Spector had done to Long and Winding Road, and it says, I'd considered orchestrating Long and Winding Road, but I decided against it. But it's interesting to see them here actually talking about possibly adding strings onto it. At this point, I find myself shouting at my TV screen, Linda, will you please take Heather home now? I've kind of had enough of seeing her there now, as I'm sure probably the rest of the band had. We move on to the 27th of January. George said, as he has done several times during these sessions, I wrote a new song last night, and he was talking a little bit about it, and maybe you were doing a similar thing to what I was doing. I was trying to think, what song's he talking about here? And then, of course, it was Old Brown Shoe, and we see George bashing that out on the piano. It's nice to see George on a piano, not something that we really see very often. And I thought it was interesting that at this point, while George, Paul and Ringo were working on Old Brown Shoe, you see John actually roadieing, carrying equipment. There's been lots of occasions in Beatles years when it's felt that John maybe didn't give his full attention to George's songs. And I noticed, interestingly, that here was another case where John was actually, he'd rather be lifting speakers than working on this. But then conversely, towards the back end of this episode, you hear John sort of talking about For You Blue, for example, has been pretty much one of his favourites that he's worked on during the sessions. So it's interesting looking at the John-George dynamic on George's songs there. Long and Winding Road, they're playing it again, but it seems to have kind of regressed from yesterday. It was ready then. They seem to be going backwards with it, and it doesn't feel at all like it's working. George Martin to the rescue. I've had the question asked to me about, as I'm sure has been discussed for years, about, what exactly was George Martin's role in all this? And I've never quite got my head round it, to be honest. He's there, he's present throughout. He comes to the rescue here, basically saying the room's not set up right acoustically and he'll get it sorted. So he's kind of there for advice and to help when he's needed, even though Glyn Johns is clearly running these sessions as a producer point of view. We see John and Yoko kissing during a run through of Oh Darling, and it's that bit we've heard it for years on bootlegs and on Anthology and in the new Let It Be box. You hear John say at the end of it, "We've just heard that Yoko's divorce has come through," but you actually see that moment on camera now of where clearly it's their reaction to that news having come through. Don't Let Me Down, there's a funny moment here where we've seen that they've been doing Don't Let Me Down right from the start of January here. They've been practising it loads and loads, and all of a sudden at this point they realise that the words don't fit the tune. I'm not quite sure why it took this long to figure out, but they've got like extra words in and extra syllables, and they're having to figure out what they need to get rid of to make it fit. And then we see Paul at the piano playing a nice little run through Strawberry Fields Forever. John's just doing some little licks on the guitar, but again it's nice to see that they're going back and playing some of those other songs. That obviously, wouldn't it have been great if they could have actually done a live version of Strawberry Fields Forever? Of course, something that we never got to see. We're then on to Get Back. Loads of takes of Get Back. Some of them are clearly better than others, and then they nail it. The album version is recorded during this session, although Phil Spector would later, a year later, he would make it sound like it was a rooftop version by adding crowd noises and having John's sort of spoken parts at the end of it. But that was recorded here and now. I've got a feeling it's close to being right, but it's still not quite there. It feels like it's sort of held back on a leash. It's not quite been sort of let go yet. Specifically lately after the new Let It Be release, I've always sort of thought that I've got a feeling it's like the son of Helter Skelter. There's a lot of similarities between the two, but it's just not quite as crazy as Helter Skelter. But this one, it's just not quite there yet. We're then on to the 28th of January. George is playing Something. And we've seen that clip in the trailers where John's offering advice about, just say cauliflower attracts me like a cauliflower. Just put that in until you get the words right. We see at this point that George is toying with having it as attracts me like a moth to candlelight, which is okay, but it's a bit wordy, I think. So, they're working on the lyrics, but it's not quite there yet. And again, I thought it was surprising that they were doing this at this point, because it's a song that clearly wasn't going to be ready in time for either the rooftop concert or for the end of their sessions on the 31st. So would they have been better using the time more productively on other things? I don't know. We then get a nice sort of chilled out lounge version of Love Me Do, which is interesting. They're just only for about a minute or so, but you just hear them sort of a real relaxed version. And again, it's nice to hear them harking back to their early days during these sessions. We've then got a section where Paul's not there, but there's John, George and Ringo, and John says that he'd met with Alan Klein last night. John says, I think he's fantastic, and says he's going to represent me anyway. So again, there's that little bit of sadness there about, oh God, here we go, it's coming. More about Alan Klein later. Back to Old Brown Shoe, Billy Preston. There's a funny bit here where they've got a stylophone. You know, the old sort of stylophones with the pen. Billy Preston's playing Old Brown Shoe on stylophone. The look of concentration on his face was really funny. He's desperate to try and get a good sound out of this thing. And then it just cuts very, very briefly to Linda sat at an electric keyboard, just playing a few notes. And I thought it was quite interesting to think, little did she know, you know, in a few years' time, she would be the keyboard player in one of the biggest bands in the world. And she'd probably hardly ever played one at this point. John then shouts, Alan Klein's here. And they head off, and it says on screen that they're going off for their first full band meeting with him. It's a real shame that the camera crew couldn't have gone and captured that. I understand why that wouldn't have happened. Probably nobody would have wanted them there, but you just start thinking that, oh God, I wish I could see what that meeting was like. We then cut to the 29th of January. This is the day before the Rooftop concert. They're talking about what's going to happen tomorrow and the fact that they've got 6 songs that they think are probably going to be ready for that concert. And you sort of see a few of them sort of grouped around talking about Alan Klein. Glyn Johns says, he really is very strange, isn't he? And then there's an astonishing line from Ringo that you just think, God, did this not set alarm bells ringing? Ringo says, Andy's a con man who's on our side for a change. He might be on your side, Ringo, but you've just said he's a con man. So it's interesting to see what their kind of early reactions were to what was going on with that. Paul, surprisingly now, he's having doubts about going up on the rooftop. He's nervous. So he has this sort of very candid conversation with John where he's saying about, you know, for example, when in the early days of the Beatles, they had a period of time where they didn't play for a while. The first gig back, they were very nervous. And then it was only the second gig where sort of things really sort of took off and were great again. And he was worried that the rooftop was going to be like that first gig back where the nerves were going to spoil it. And John's trying to reassure him, you know, that we're going to be okay. And it leads into quite a heavy conversation about that point, about where they're saying, you know, effectively, if they don't do this rooftop concert, they've got no payoff for their efforts. They've got all this footage that's all well and good, but without a proper ending. They just feel that, you know, have they been wasting the time? Are the recordings good enough? And they can't even sort of agree what the end result of it should be at that point. George says, I don't want to go on the roof. Ringo then follows up with, I do want to go on the roof. And John agrees with Ringo. So you've got this camp at the moment of Paul and George, who, for different reasons, are pretty reluctant. They don't want to do this. And then John and Ringo, who are just well up for it. They look at a list of songs for the album, and then they realise that actually, you know what? We've got enough songs for an album here. This is, in terms of if we want to make an album, this is all good. We've got what we need. And I think at that point, it looks like it took a bit of pressure off them. We've got what we need. Right, let's go and do this rooftop concert, and that can be an added bonus. It'll help the film. But, you know, at least we know we've got an album at this point. It was interesting looking at what they'd got a list of songs, and they ticked the ones that they thought that they could do on the roof. And interestingly, Two of Us is ticked as a potential rooftop song at this point. Of course, that never happened. But interesting to see that they were planning that. We see Paul's brother Mike McCartney, or Mike McGear. He's there watching, so that's interesting to see him. He's a successful pop star in his own right by this point, but he's popped in for the day. We've then got a high energy run through of Dig It, which is good. So you know, on the final song that we hear on the Let It Be album, where John's sort of shouting out things like BBC, FBI, etc. At this point, he's just singing song titles from the Let It Be session. So he's singing Let It Be, For You Blue, I'm in Mine. So it's good to see him still playing around with that. There's then a really interesting conversation between George and John, where George tells John that, you know, I've got all these songs stacking up. I've got enough for 10 years worth of Beatles albums. I'd love to just put an album out on my own, sort of use these songs up. And he's saying that I think we should all do that. We should all be allowed to go off and do our own stuff, and then we can come back and focus on being Beatles in between. John agrees with him and says that it's, that's a good idea. And then you see this look on George's face, and it just felt to me like a look of, as though George had been wanting to say this for such a long time, and it had been such a big thing that's building up inside of him. And it's like a kind of a look of relief of sort of, wow, I've said it, I've done it. And I thought that was really interesting to see that George is really keen to get these songs out there. And maybe that's the way that the Beatles could have gone if the business things hadn't gone in the way. Maybe that's what would have happened over the next few years. We will never know. There's then a really good section with Billy Preston singing over, they're playing the music of I Want You, She's So Heavy, but Billy Preston's singing, but he's singing a kind of a version that's based on Martin Luther King and sort of lyrics all about racial harmony, so that was really nice to see. There's then a very funny take of Two of Us. You'll have seen it on the trailers, no doubt, where Paul and John are playing Two of Us through gritted teeth like this. Two of us riding nowhere. Lips not moving at all, teeth not moving at all. And that's really funny. It's great to see that the fact that this is the day after that first Alan Klein meeting. And although it's going to all go south during the course of the year, at this point they're still able to have great fun together. They then suggest being in bright and early for tomorrow for the rooftop gig. Now, bright and early to them means 11:30, and I'm just thinking, you pampered rock stars. If that's what you think is 11:30, you maybe ought to spend a bit of time in the real world. I'm just jealous because I have to go to work. 30th of January anyway, it's rooftop concert day. So it's a cold but bright morning in central London. They're less than a mile north of Buckingham Palace here, and we see the cameras setting up on the roof. They've boarded the roof to strengthen it, and it tells us that they've got 5 cameras on the roof. They've got 1 on a roof across the road. They've got 3 down on the street capturing people's thoughts who are passers-by, and then they've got a hidden camera in the entrance. I am so glad about that one because that's going to lead to a lot of fun during the rooftop concert. The whole setup though looks really, really precarious, and to be honest, I'm surprised nobody died during that concert. You've got the edge of the roof that's just supported by 1 metal bar going across. And you've got the guys across the road on the other building. They're stood on a roof and just leant against a chimney top. And you just think, how did nobody fall off that roof that day? Paul and George still look hesitant at this point as they're setting up on the roof. So it starts with this, a short sound check of Get Back, and then they're into it. Get Back, take 1. We see the passers-by below. They're looking interested. They're looking intrigued. And I'd wondered how they were going to do this. How are they going to do this rooftop concert? Well, we start to see now how Peter Jackson has decided to present it to us. The first decision that he makes, I really love. The split screen. And this is obviously a lot more doable these days. When you know that it's going to be watched on TV, because people have got generally much bigger screens now. But you've got the band maybe playing in one part of the screen. You've got another part that's maybe showing what's going on down below, or you've got another camera angle. So we get to see maybe 2 camera angles or even 3 camera angles of what's going on at the same time. I thought that was a fantastic editorial decision by Peter Jackson there to do that. We see the public giving the thoughts from the street, and they really like it. Get Back take 2, them going to. Now, this is a better take. John's fingers seem to have loosened up. It's damn cold up there. I mean, I've done outdoor gigs in much warmer weather than what they're playing, and it can be a nightmare to get your fingers moving. John's fingers seem like they're warming up a bit now, and he's playing it a lot better. We then get to a section, that then continues right throughout, that I appreciate is probably going to annoy a lot of people about how they've decided to do this. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments, what you think about this. So, while the Beatles are playing, we've then got the people down on the ground, the public who are watching, talking, giving their opinions. Not all the time, just part of the way through. Now that means, if you were hoping to get a clean audio rip, for example, of the rooftop concert, you ain't going to get it from this. So maybe, did they do that knowing that, well, that sort of maybe helps a future standalone rooftop release because people won't have got a clean one from this? Maybe, I don't know. I didn't mind this. I thought, I didn't feel that they were doing it at the most invasive times. I think they sort of kept it to the right times when they did it. But you've got these public sort of vox pops, I think they call them, during the song, which are really interesting. You've got this one businessman going, I think it disrupts all the business in the area. He's not happy. Generally, people are happy. The mixture of ages of people as well. It was interesting to see how many older people were sort of saying, oh yes, I really like the Beatles. I really like what they do. Would you like your daughter to go out with one? Oh yes, they've got money. I thought it was interesting to get a lot more of those perspectives, but I understand that some people aren't going to like that they've done it that way. We hear them do Don't Let Me Down. The police arrive. Now, I think what we then get is the rest of the rooftop concert, the way that it's been presented, the way that Peter Jackson's presented this, it's very much, it's the band versus the police. You know, who's going to win out here? And I really like it. Add some tension to it. Add some story to it. And I really like how they've done this. So the police arrive. You've got some old duffer in a bowler hat pointing them in the right direction. That's where you want to be. That's where they're playing. And I thought, you miserable old git. But anyway, we then see the band do I've Got a Feeling. And it's the version that ends up on the Let It Be album. The police are in the building now. They say, can we have a word, please? We don't appreciate this, the noise you're making on the street. We've had 30 complaints in half an hour. And the policeman also says, turn it down or I'm going to start arresting people. Now, Debbie on reception. We don't really, I think we once catch a bit of a glimpse of Debbie on reception. She turns out to be one of the stars of the show for me now. Now, I would love to think that this was all pre-planned with the band, but she just stalls the police for so long. By sort of saying that she's going to go and get people, and by saying you can't go through that door because it's a recording studio and it's locked. And Debbie's an absolute legend as far as I'm concerned of just keeping the police there while the Beatles do their concert. It cuts to an old lady outside. She's not happy at all. She says, I just can't see that it makes sense. It woke me up from my sleep and I don't like it. But again, that gets mixed with a lot of people who are kind of really appreciating what's going on up on the roof. We've then got One After 909, the Let It Be version. And Mal Evans comes down to the reception. Again, this hidden camera in reception, it doesn't look too hidden to me because it seems to be moving around a lot. They have a discussion about potentially turning off the PA, which wouldn't help the band because they wouldn't be able to hear what they were doing then. Legend Debbie on reception then happens to casually mention about the fact that they're up on the roof. The police had no idea about that. What? They're up on the roof? They just assumed that the noise was so loud coming from the recording studio bleeding out into the street. And then I did laugh at the policeman at this point then decides that he's something of a music producer and he starts offering musical advice. He says, well, if it's a film, can't they just dub the sound on afterwards? And I'm thinking, well, it was quite funny anyway, but, you know, leave it to the professionals. But I can understand why the police were concerned when you look at the fact that, like I said before, I'm surprised nobody died falling off that roof. We've then got Dig a Pony by the Beatles up on the roof. That's the version that you hear on the Let It Be album. And then there's a second take of I've Got a Feeling, clearly not as good as the first take. Mal, at this point, offers to take the police upstairs. And I think this, again, I'd like to think that Mal was kind of under instructions here. Yes, you can bring the police up. You know, Paul McCartney had been saying right from the start of these sessions that we want something where, you know, the police end it or as though we're trespassing or something like that. And I would love to think that they got Mal to just hold the police off as long as possible. And then when they're about finished, yeah, let's have the police up then. If they stop us, it doesn't matter, we've done it. They do a second take of Don't Let Me Down, and the police by now are up on the roof and they're kind of observing. And we see Paul, playing the mid-song, they see Paul turn round. Paul sees the police, and as he turns back round, there's a massive smile on his face, and he goes, woo! He's really happy that the police are there up on the roof now. We see Sergeant Kendrick, the big imposing figure of Sergeant Kendrick with lots of stripes on his arms. He arrives, he gets told, and again I'd like to think that this was a bit of bluffing, oh, but you can't go on the roof, there's a weight limit, which I thought was quite funny because he was quite a large gentleman. The band, after they've done that Don't Let Me Down, they go straight into Get Back. There's no messing. They don't want an opportunity to be shut down mid-song, so they go straight into it. Mal Evans then comes up and actually switches John's amp and George's amp off while they're playing. So John's giving it loads on the guitar and all of a sudden there's no sound coming out. It's because Mal switched it off. So you see John having a word with Mal as if to say, get that amp back on now. John switches his amp back on, so does George, and they carry on and play the take of Get Back. Again, it's not as good a take, but I don't think it was intended to be. I think by this point they just wanted the police to stop the show because they'd done everything really that they needed to do. They finish that song, and that's when John gives his famous thanks on behalf of ourselves and the group, and I hope we pass the audition, that's then edited onto that studio version from a few days before. And then everyone just walks off. The Beatles as a live band are finished. They are no more. We see them all walk downstairs. But then really interestingly, we see the aftermath of what happens afterwards. We see everybody gathered in the control room, just listening to playbacks of some of the songs that they played up on the roof. And they look like they're really buzzing off it. They look like they're really loving it. But then George brings it back down again by saying, no more rooftops. It was really bad. And the reason that he says no more rooftops is that the band had been talking at that point about, well, this could just be the start. We could go and play across rooftops across London. This only needs to be the start of it. But George isn't having any of that. No more rooftops for him. We then cut to 31st of January, which is the last day of these sessions. And I was really intrigued to see how they would handle this, because this is the day when they filmed like the proper video clips for Two of Us, Long Winding Road, Let It Be. And I thought we might see all those, but we don't. We just see little snippets of each as the end credits roll, really. So I'm surprised, because they're the kind of complete performances recorded for this, that we didn't get this in this movie, which again makes me even more convinced than ever that maybe they're holding that back for the DVD Blu-ray release, because they could be extras on there, and I'd be amazed if they're not. So yeah, we've reached the end credits now of this, and I mentioned in my episode 2 review that I wondered how they would end it, and I was kind of expecting that they might do a little potted history of what happens next, like they did right at the start that was up to the sessions. I thought they'd mention about the fact that over the course of 1969, Glyn Johns worked on a few mixers that were never released, Phil Spector came in, and eventually the album was released in May 1970. None of that is not mentioned at all. We have the end credits. As far as this film is concerned, as far as this movie is concerned, 31st of January 1969 is when it all ends. Anything else that happened afterwards is not getting mentioned here. So that was interesting, and I must admit a little bit of a surprise to me. So that's the end of the 8 hours, and I mean, it's been an absolute blast, it really has. One thing that it made me wonder is, and I kind of asked myself the question, once I'd watched the Rooftop concert, I thought, do I need a standalone, for example, vinyl version or CD or both of the Rooftop concert, the complete Rooftop concert? And I kind of always said, yeah, of course I do. And I feel a little bit now as though I'm less inclined to say yes. Don't get me wrong, if it comes, I'll be excited and I'll buy it and I'll love it. But I don't feel I need it as much now, and that's because I've seen how visual it is. That concert is very stop-start, because there's some points where they have to change tape reels, they're altering sound levels. It's not they would have to be edited, otherwise it would be quite weird to listen to, I think, all the way through if you didn't have the visuals. And also as well, just that story that Peter Jackson has shown there about the band versus the police, I think is brilliant. And I think things like Mal Evans unplugging John and George's amps, if you're listening to it on record, you'll just think it's all gone a bit quiet at that point. Why has all the guitar disappeared? So it works a lot better visually. So I don't feel I need it as much now after seeing that. But it's been an absolute blast. I'm really looking forward to seeing, for example, what extras we might get on a DVD with Blu-ray. I think Peter Jackson's done an amazing job. I know some people are hypercritical of certain decisions, whether that's visually or audio or whatever, but a filmmaker like Peter Jackson, he knows what he's doing. And if he's made a decision, personally, I trust the fact that he's made that decision for a reason. He's got access to a lot more than we have to know why he's made that decision. And I think it's just been an absolute triumph. I'm really glad that nobody's blocked this release, because for years, Let It Be releases have been blocked by one person or another. You make your own mind up about who's done that. It looks like we're probably going to get the Let It Be film restored next year as well, when this new Get Back movie comes out, which is what we were promised when this movie was announced. So I'm really excited about that. It'd be interesting to go back and watch that again now and just see how down and depressing does it look in comparison. And I'm not sure that I haven't seen it recently enough to know the answer to that. I've probably not seen it for 25 years. So really interested in that, but I think I've prattled on for long enough now. Let's hear your comments down below. Thank you very much for joining me over these 3 episodes. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because I'll be doing loads more on all those other sorts of stuff that comes out, and I hope you can join me for that. But thank you very much for watching. I've got my Disney mug appropriately. I'm going to take a nice drink and sign off now. Cheers, bye bye.